So, hi, folks. It's really good to see you once again. Welcome to me, Jesus, and the church. And today I have with me Nigel Lightfoot. Hello, Nigel.
Hello, Langley.
It's really good to see you. Thank you for spending the time to talk with us. So, Nigel, it's great to have you with us. Let's start with the beginnings then. So, it's rumoured that you used to take as a young lad, a hobby was taking down the car number plates in Peterborough.
Yes, I was actually. It was the days when there weren't quite so many cars on the road, and yes, I was certainly a very avid car number collector. Certainly something you can't do today. I lived the greatest percentage of my young life on Mayor's Walk. Many of you will know Mayor's Walk, now one of the main arterial roads over the railway. And I used to sit with a couple of pals on a curbside waiting for a car to come. Have been known to walk out into the middle of the road to see if one is coming, turning round to the pals and saying, "No, I'm sorry, there's nothing in sight." So we would trundle then off up to Lincoln Road, where in a good afternoon we would get something in the order of 20 to 30 vehicle numbers. And that was certainly an avid pastime of mine, many happy hours on that particular pastime. And of course, also I'd got the envy of a lot of people. The Great Eastern cleaning sheds were bang opposite where I lived. One of my jobs in childhood was to sit on the wall when I was off school and to let mother know when a steam loco had gone in. And we knew that it was about just over an hour when it would come out our side of the buildings and let off steam, clear the boilers. And she would know, I would give her adequate warning, and she'd be able to fetch the washing in because it used to go all over our properties when they cleared the boilers. And also on the other part of the square was the Methodist chapel that I spent the largest percentage of my formative years in, Midland Road Methodist Chapel. So that was the little scenario there.
It's just fascinating. I mean, the idea, so 20 cars would be a good afternoon in the centre of Peterborough, and the age of steam, which is not that long ago, but the age of steam, but the practicality of steam, because we kind of look to the steam track. I'm interested that you weren't into steam engines, but you were in cars.
And a very interesting thing was wasn't unknown that our Methodist superintendent or one of the Methodist ministers would go along and they would hold a service over on the Westwood airfield amongst these huts. And of course, the majority were good Catholic boys. And I say boys because there weren't many, not any as far as I know, women came over to the beet factory. And they would hold a mass, but occasionally a free church would be invited. And I can well remember on one or two occasions that it was said that the superintendent minister would go over and partake in that.
So it's fascinating. So even back then, it was about ministry being shaped according to the context and the needs of people. So you had a migrant population of workers, and the church would adapt, and the superintendent would go. That's fascinating. You did mention RAF Peterborough, and I am aware of that, and that's part of our heritage because of my link with Air Cadets. But so then I became aware of where RAF Peterborough used to be. I mean, there's still Sibston is an operating airfield, but of course it was very big. I found that, to how times move on, and then you can see the architecture around you. So wow, church. So am I right in assuming that you would be a cradle Methodist?
I had the very good fortune to be born into a family where my father was brought up a Roman Catholic, but his faith moved tremendously through wartime experiences, but I won't touch too much on that. But the Methodist side was very much on my mother's side. As I hinted earlier, my great-grandfather was a local preacher in this circuit. He started in 1863 and he went through to 1936.
Wow.
So he covered a large spell. He lived to be an old gentleman indeed. And it followed down through the line. And my mother was certainly a very great figure to me in the Methodist way. And I was fortunate also to, when we moved into the family home in Mayor's Walk from the Cromwell Road area where I was born, we were joined to the Midland Road Methodist Chapel there. We had a very large Sunday school there. In fact, along Mayor's Walk, there was the St. Luke's as it is today. It was St. John's Mission of the St. John's in church. And there used to be a competition as to what was going on, which Sunday school you went to. And at school, you would very much talk about what was happening. It was an open conversation. And I can honestly say that I don't know I can't think offhand of any children that didn't go to either the mission or to the Methodist. And we were also blessed at Midland Road with a wonderful superintendent. And in those days, you used to meet in the morning and then again in the afternoon. And the afternoon was when you had your lessons. And his name was Mr. Bert Sloat. And he had a marvellous way. He used to come round to the front of the lectern before we split up into our various classes. And he used to open up a passage of Bible to us. And he used to tell those stories such a way that you were there in that scene. And he would take you into that scene, and then he would say, right, now you go out into your various groups. And I think we had about, 70 children, 70 in the Sunday school. And so it divided up from little ones right through to Bible class. So that had a very great bearing on me. And Mr. Sloat still bears very much in my soul gratitude for the way he illuminated that. But then we moved on and we had a young people's club that developed. And again, we had wonderful youth leaders. And one of the things was they encouraged you then, by then we'd be about 12, something like that, to go to the evening service. And so a whole group of us used to go to the evening service, and then the people that ran the young people's group at the time, they had quite a large house on Alderman's Drive, and after the service we used to troop round to their home, and you could just loosen up, and invariably the preacher would come along, and believe you me, they had interrogation. They really did. And they loved it. At least I think they did.
Yeah.
They loved it. And that grew the development on within me. And then I suppose when I was about 13, the minister at the time said to a number of us, now, have you thought about looking at membership? And I remember his words. He said, think carefully about it, because alongside membership will come a commitment. And if you feel that you would like to pursue this a little more, we'll get a group together. And so I think there were about 10 of us that went to this particular group membership. And I can always remember, and I still wrestle with it today, when we came on the subject, truly God, truly man. I really couldn't get that into my head. Truly God, truly man. And of course, we went through the procedures and so on. And I remember going to ask him, and when it came to the time to make a decision whether we wanted to go forward, I said, well, I can't, I don't think I can go forward because I can't get it all. I can't understand it all. And I can see his wry smile now. And he said, what's your problem? I said, this truly God, truly man. I said, I can't get it. And he said, well, I'm going to let you into a secret. I don't fully get it. And he smiled. And anyhow, we went on from there. And of course, you understand exactly what he was saying, incomprehensibly made man, as we say. But then we moved on a little more. And you must remember, I had the privilege of being in my teens when the flower people were about.
The flower people?
The flower people.
Right.
And we were invited to go to the MAYC weekend in London. And there was 3 coach loads of us youngsters went from Peterborough. There was one that came from Crowland. If Margaret's listening to this, she'll remember those days and that far-flung place called Crowland. And off we went to the MAYC weekend. And we had a marvellous time. The Albert Hall was absolutely full. We met in the park opposite, and there was about 3 or 4 police officers there just sitting around. And there was no hassle. And we went into this gathering, and one of the key people that was a guest that year was Gladys Aylward, the missionary from China who led those children, on that great mission journey. She was only a little lady, tiny little lady, but boy, did she have an impact on us. And we listened to that. And then the challenge was the flower people and all the flower power that was about amongst youngsters. We were challenged then, and they said, right, you all go off now and you talk to these hippies.
Yeah.
Because we were their contemporaries.
Yes.
Kipper ties and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And we thought, what a challenge. But we went and we did it. We went out enthusiastic in the afternoon and we talked and we chatted because, of course, flower power, it all had the impulse. But we were able to speak to them. And they said, don't just speak. Doesn't matter how you do it. Bring in part of what we're about. And I thought, oh, gosh, for me, I thought, well, how on earth do you do that? And it was amazing, the conversations that flowed. And we heard some wonderful stories of how we been able to go to our contemporaries and to sort of speak to them of Jesus. And then one person who used to come to us very often at Midland Road on a Sunday evening was a local preacher who was quite elderly. All people are elderly when you're a teenager, aren't they? But he was quite elderly. And he used to come to us, and he used to, right at the beginning of his service, he would say, I'm very sorry to say, but I've forgotten my spectacles this evening. And he would look across to the young people and he would say, would one of you come and read the lesson? And he'd get you involved.
Yes.
And mysteriously, when it came, we knew what was coming. Later on in the service, these spectacles would emerge. And we knew jolly well what Cyril Sumpter was doing. And he gradually sort of, he was one that used to come very enthusiastically to our group afterwards. And he used to love to be there and be interrogated, And he said to one or two, the challenge, he said, we have something, local preachers. and he began to talk about things like that. And there was sort of a niggle came into me, and we were blessed in Midland Road with a number of local preachers. And I went and said to somebody, I said, I don't know. I said, I've got a feeling. And this person who I spoke to said, right, well, you've got to test it. And I did put it to the test. And you said last evening at the local preachers meeting, you did the blue box and some blue folders, and some did others. And I think one or two of us smiled. Mine was the study of the Old Testament, study of the New Testament, Christian doctrine, and the worship and preaching. There's just come out, the book, Billingham book. So I had 4 books to do, and it was hard. It was hard to do because every week, but I still thought then, it's something that grew and developed and is still growing and developing. You never lose that. But that's sort of the journey through in the early formative times.
Just amazing, Nigel. And I think, yeah, it's clearly you're beyond the point where you see some people. I would ask, can you think of a moment when you came to faith or when God God seemed especially close? And some people say, well, I've always known this. I've not known anything else. I've always journeyed with Jesus. But it's quite clear in your journey that there were points where intellectually you were challenged, but it's more than that. It's going deeper than that. And there are clearly points where you were moved, particularly by the MAYC thing. I think a common thread seems to be, firstly, the value, however God does it, because I think we can think, oh, how do we create X and Y? But there seems to be the value of going away, whether it's to a larger festival. It almost seems like a sort of pilgrimage. I mean, MAYC had it in place, didn't they, with the Albert Hall back in the day. And also I hear people who've gone to Cliff College festivals, but it seems to me that there are the opportunity to kind of travel with your own congregation or a group from within there and pilgrim elsewhere and meet with other Christians. They just seem to be points where God seems to speak. I'm sure God can speak in other ways in our local chapel, but there's something about that which I find very moving, very encouraging. About, just before we move on in the second section, perhaps talk about church. I'm intrigued about how you felt led to become a funeral director. How did that happen? Because the last time I looked on career choices, it didn't seem terribly kind of high on the list. I mean, how did that? I'm intrigued to know how that evolved.
The answer is so am I. It's one of those situations where I was at a point where, because initially I was in the gas industry for many years, and 2 points that are interesting there. When I joined the gas industry, it was still very much, there was a lot of families involved in it in Peterborough. It was a lot of family orientated, but my first boss was a retired army captain, and you jolly well knew he was a retired army captain. And he was a person who I didn't really warm to, because he was very, very dry, and I thought very cynical. And one of his first things he said to me, he said, boy, remember one thing. This is not a practice. This is it. Life it was. It's not a practice. This is it. So I thought, oh, okay. And, you try getting your head around that. you know, you think, oh well, okay. But I learned an awful lot from that man, because he'd obviously been honed very much by his wartime experiences, which he didn't wear, but it was honed on, and this sort of thing. And he brought this discipline in that was sometimes very, very irritating indeed, and demanding.
Okay.
But I learned an awful lot from him, because at the back of it and underpinning it was a heart of gold. If you were wrong, woe betide you, he would tell you. But if you were right, he would affirm you. And out of that distance, I bore a respect, and eventually I can say a love for the chap, a real love in its proper meaning, love and high regard for him. And I learned a lot from him. And he did, underneath that, he did have a Christian practice as well, which I won't go into at that side, because it would take me a lot. But he interpreted and applied it in what had been a very hard experience that he'd had. And that sort of put me on the road to realizing that discernment is a big part of living. And to then move along, I'd come to a change that I felt very much that I needed to take, and it just moved me into the area of care and concern. And I decided that I would apply, and I was accepted, and then I spent quite a number of years as a funeral director.
It's I'm sure that you've got plenty of stories, but I'm not gonna. I think the difficulties I find when we're sharing in conversation, that in terms of testimony, I feel bound and unable to share some of the things I want to share, because other people are still alive and with us. But I feel a real kindred spirit with funeral directors in general. I think it's because in terms of helping a family remember and mark the passing of a loved one, you're very much it's very much a team thing on the day, even though, and things are very, very clearly organized from the outset, from the minute as a minister that you get the kind of initial letter, and everybody kind of knows their place, and everybody is wholly reliant on each other, but doesn't necessarily kind of make that obvious. I mean, I kind of, as I say, my understanding was that funeral directors would sort anything calmly, and that was the key word. I think there's a calmness, and also there is a kind of, I do feel there is a shared humor between funeral directors and ministers. It's when you see something not quite go right, or you see something slightly amusing, there is a quiet humor, but of course you're mindful about how that will be interpreted, I mean, and certainly so it is kind of a little bit suppressed in how you express yourself, but it's there, and a huge respect mutually, as we all understand this. It is and I don't want to I think I don't mean it deliberately as a pun, but it's a grave undertaking, as you mark somebody's life.
One of the golden rules, I think with all occupations, but particularly, in the prominent ones, is you're always on parade. When you have to have a good listening ear, and you have to discern when to comment and when to keep your mouth shut, because people grieve in all sorts of ways. Some come to you very angry, and mum's died, and why? Because we know that death is very much a taboo subject today, although it is opening up a little more now than what it was, but very much a taboo. And if anybody dares to die under 102, they were far too young to die, etc. So you have to bring that And yes, your image of, you know, calm and serene. Yes, well, of course, it's the swan
Yeah,
syndrome.
yes.
You know, because there are all sorts of benefits, but it's tremendously rewarding because you feel that you will know from your practice as a presbyter, you go into all sorts of situations. The biggest part, you listen. It differs slightly in our profession that you're there to do a job, but you learn how to do it. You cannot say that you know, I will deal with Mr. and Mrs. So and so. I'll be back in an hour. It might be an hour and a half. It might be three-quarters of an hour. It's a very, very sensitive time, and it's a great privilege because you enter into situations that are completely private, and people open up, and you do get a blessing from that.
We could talk loads. We will resist the temptation to talk about strange things that have happened in funeral services that nobody ever knew about. But if it's okay with you, Nigel, if we could just take a break and then we'll come back and then we'll talk about how the church has been, how you found the church helpful, since, of course, you know, Jesus calls us to be part of a community gathered around him, which we call church. So would that be okay, Nigel?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.